Well, hello, class. I have my new Snowball mic here, so hopefully this video sound will be much clearer as I kind of give you some news updates and key points to think about as you jump into Chapter 3. And this whole chapter is looking at the factors that you need to consider before launching an e-commerce business. And so the first part of it is really kind of some things that you just want to work through and plan and prepare before you ever actually launch a business. And so some of the things that this chapter will talk about is setting up your vision. And that's kind of more than a goal. It's a big plan of what you're wanting to get from this business. What do you see it impacting in society? And so it's kind of the big picture thing is the vision. And then looking at the revenue plan, because that's important. How are you going to gain revenue? I've started 2 nonprofits, and yes, even with nonprofits, you have to have revenue, or things don't go well. And it was actually a struggle in both of my cases with that aspect. So I think definitely important to look at your revenue streams and your audience. Who is this business going to attract? And so it's got to be something that is a need in society, or with people that you have done the research on, kind of that market analysis, and looked at who's going to be interested in this business that you're setting up. And then a timeline of when you're wanting to launch, and that can be pretty quick for some of these small businesses, but a lot of times you're looking at several months to just map out all of the steps and getting all of the things set up, your web presence, your hardware in place, your people, developing all of your branding and all of those kind of things. And so one of the first things that you'll also want to do is called a SWOT analysis. And SWOT is SWOT, and it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's just good to look at the market from that perspective. I have included in your kind of optional materials for the week a tool that helps you kind of think through those quadrants of the SWOT tool and create a different graphical format for those. So you might want to take a look at that. And I like to do more of the hands-on stuff. So all of this theory with e-commerce is great, but I like to see some of it in practice. And so I'm trying to give you some tools and tips along the way for that. So you'll have to also decide kind of whether you're going to be trying to do things in-house or you're outsourcing them. And that it's going to depend a lot on your skill set, on the skill sets of the people that you have in your business, and how much money you have, those kind of different things. So, when I started both of my nonprofits, I created the websites myself. Of course, that was a long time ago. So, at first they were static websites. And you're going to learn the difference in this chapter between static and dynamic. And that's going to be really key for your understanding of e-commerce. So let me try to explain that a little bit. So when I started, let's say my rescue group, it was a static website in that I had to manually put up anything that I wanted on those pages. I used FrontPage back then was my tool. Dreamweaver is what you're probably more familiar with now if you're thinking in terms of those tools. But I would create a page, and if I had a new dog that was up for adoption, I would have to go grab that picture and I would put it up, and then I would change all of the information. I would add in their name and their little story and everything, and then I would upload that page, and it would stay there until I did something different with that page. So that was a static page. As you can imagine, that's really cumbersome for somebody to do if you have more than a few pets that you're putting on an adoption site. So think about this. I think your book gives the example of eBay, but since I'm going with animals, I'm going to go with the example of Pet Finder. If you've ever not gone out to Pet Finder, you can do that now if you haven't. Go petfinder.com, and you'll see all these animals that are up for adoption, right? From just tons of organizations all across America. Well, somebody is not sitting there, the founder of Pet Finder is not sitting there and adding those manually to a page. Instead, they're pulling that information from various places, from a database is where they're ultimately being pulled from. So that's the same as eBay. eBay isn't out there, frantically trying to update each page at a time as a new item comes up. Those items are being put in a database, and then they're being pulled in. And that's what we call a dynamic web page. And that's what you're going to need for e-commerce purposes. And so I got to have some experience with this when I worked for the Center for Media Production at the University of North Texas. And you'll see as part of that chapter, it talks about different like scripting languages, talks a little bit about JavaScript and Ruby and all of those. And one of those it lists is Cold Fusion. And that's the scripting that you write to connect these databases with the website. And that's what I did. I wrote Cold Fusion scripts. I connected a PeopleSoft database with the web front-end interface. And so that way you're not actually updating the pages themselves as new information comes. That new information is just in the database and is being pulled from there. So if I add 3 more dogs to my database, then suddenly those 3 dogs appear on the website without me actually changing the page. And so in terms of shopping carts and business aspects like that, it's just a really critical component to have these dynamic sites that really the back end is a database that stores all of the information. And then your website, it has some of the framing, the theme and all of those kind of things and intro remarks and stuff, but the actual content is just being generated. So something to keep in mind. And I've put another link out there for you. So setting all of that up on your own, getting all of the shopping and the security and accepting credit cards and all of that can be a little overwhelming. So there are, especially as you're starting small, there are some kind of packages, and one of the most simple is the Weebly websites tool. It lets you create websites with their kind of templates and their packages, and they do have an e-commerce package. So I put that link out there for you to kind of look at, maybe play around. If you're like me, you might want to create one. You can create a free one and kind of just see what capabilities it has to start launching e-commerce. But the point of your chapter is you kind of have to decide if you're going to be doing all of that from scratch, if you're going to be getting some of these packages. And of course there are obviously much more advanced packages as you grow, and you'll see that as well in the chapter. So I think that's kind of the highlights of what it's trying to walk you through and the decisions that you're making. You're going to look at some of the e-commerce software, just kind of the functions that you'll see in this chapter, things like the online catalog, shopping carts, credit card processing. It'll go through some of those that I mentioned, and also talk about some of those server software packages that combine everything. And then what I thought was kind of fun and interesting, there's a couple pages there towards the end that talks about website features that annoy people. And I used to, when I taught web design, I would have like the 10 commandments of web design, thou shalt not combine these, scrolling background, over text and things that blink constantly and make your people have seizures, basically. And so I think that those are good to read, though, not just for amusement, but also just to realize what does pull people into your site and what kind of distracts them, and they don't want to. And besides those kind of obvious visual things, there's a lot of technical things that really fall into that category. I mean, people don't like to wait. If the page doesn't load, or if it crashes, then that's obviously a big problem. So I would encourage you to kind of look at those as well. And finally, your chapter kind of concludes with some of the World Wide Web Consortium and the WAG standards. It's the accessibility guidelines. And I did write a paper on that. It's been a few years ago, so I'm not saying it's the most current look at where we're at, but I think it is kind of interesting just to see how, at least at that time when we did the study, poorly university and especially K through 12 education websites did on those accessibility and why it's important. So I put that articles optional for you to read as well. So I think that's about 10 minutes of my little lecturette here. Hopefully get you excited about the chapter. I know I loved programming those dynamic web pages for the media production, because it really just exponentially increases how often people want to interact with your website. Because if it's static and they have to wait for you to do an update, obviously, especially in modern times, they don't want that. They want it to be new and fresh, whether you're pulling in, in my case it was animals, but maybe you're pulling in news stories or new items to buy or whatever it is. I think that's really key. So have fun exploring and checking out some of those optional sites and reading your chapter. And I hope you enjoy this week. All right, bye-bye.